Don't waste any more years drafting a novel only to realize the story doesn't actually work. It might not be your writing habits keeping you stuck, but your story structure. Readers' brains are prediction machines. If your story doesn't set up, disrupt, escalate, and pay off those predictions, it feels aimless, even when the prose is pretty. I'll show you the exact turning points every marketable story needs and a simple beat sheet so your novel actually goes somewhere. You'll leave with a high level outline for your novel and the brain based insight that makes it work, no matter your prior experience with outlining. I've analyzed, dozens of story structures, including 3-act, 4-act, hero's journey, save the cat, 7-point, story grid, chiastic, and even Kisho Tenketsu, and stripped them down to the common denominators readers expect. What I found points to a universal structure. But is that even possible? Does that work? Well, it's pretty clear to me that if these structures were truly different at their core, they wouldn't all converge so neatly. Sure, they use different terminology, divide the arbitrary acts differently, or assign various graphical shapes, but underneath, they all echo the same rhythm. Now, whether that's because writers have long been consciously following these formulas or because these structures naturally emerged from our shared instincts for story, that's a chicken and egg debate. Personally, I lean toward the latter. Otherwise, it would be too much of a coincidence for cultures across the world to conform to such similar beats. Barring experimental structures that intentionally break from the universal, they all either explicitly contain or allow for this boiled down set of common turning points at roughly predictable intervals. And those turning points are really just a repeated, escalated pattern of decision points, actions, and complications. And that makes sense because readers also expect these turning points pretty regularly. There's an ingrained rhythm we have for stories. Studies show that our brains rely on pattern recognition and predictive processing when engaging with stories. Our brains develop narrative schemas, unconscious patterns for how stories unfold, which prime us to expect certain turning points at roughly predictable intervals. When these expectations aren't met, something feels off. Disruptions to these patterns, such as missing or misplaced beats, create feelings of confusion or dissatisfaction, even if readers can't articulate why. So, what turning points are readers' brains actually waiting for? What are those big shifts they expect, whether they've ever studied story structure or not? Neuroscience shows us that stories with clear stakes and character transformation literally change the chemistry of the reader's brain. It triggers neuromodulators such as dopamine and oxytocin, increasing empathy and anticipation. When story beats deliver on promises or resolve tension, as in the climax and denouement, the brain feels rewarded and the limbic system is calmed. The brain's prediction error systems crave resolution after multiple unstable beats, such as the disaster or doom moment or complications, driving satisfaction especially at transformation and climax, but also at the smaller, similar patterns along the way. We get a dose of oxytocin and relief as tension resolves. It feels satisfying, even necessary. And across cultures, the same fundamental moments keep surfacing in stories, not because of coincidence, but because our brains are wired to crave them. Here are the universal beats I use with authors, stripped down to the essentials. The hook, the opening that sets the tone and expectation through the protagonist's internal conflict. Inciting incident, the disruption that launches the story. First plot point. When the protagonist takes action on the inciting incident choice, the point of no return. First act complication, the first escalation in stakes, a consequence of the protagonist taking that action. Rising action. This one's a section, not a single beat. It's a steady build of trials, leveling up, and the pursuit of a goal. Midpoint complication. A revelation or major reversal at the story's center. It's like a new inciting incident. Second act plot point. Like the first plot point, this is the action taken after a new decision about the midpoint complication. Second act complication. Again, mirroring Act 1, there's a consequence for that action and the antagonist's grip tightens, stakes deepen, or some crisis that leads to the last pieces falling into place to force the protagonist toward the climax. Disaster. This is the biggest external crisis. Everything dreaded comes true. Alternately, the disaster may look like an offer that's too good to be true. It's everything the protagonist ever wanted, but not needed. Doom moment. Internally, all is lost, and the protagonist faces the inner demon, carrying all the guilt and failure. Transformation. The internal breakthrough or realization that there's nothing left to lose, and the protagonist might as well change. For the better, by letting go of the inner demon, or for the worst, by clinging harder and doubling down. Climax. The final confrontation where the transformation is tested. The positive change allows for the possible success to overcome the external challenge or antagonist. But there are a number of combinations here that work based on the timing of the transformation and whether or not both internal and external arcs are positive or negative. Denouement, the release of tension through resolution and tying up loose ends, reflecting on the new view of the world. Leave readers in awe of everything that has occurred to them in the pages of your novel. You'll notice how these aren't that different from the beats you've probably seen elsewhere, even in my labeling, which is designed to make them a little clearer for practical use and show the repetition of the pattern readers expect. Most commercial, genre, and even literary fiction still resonates best with the brain's ingrained narrative rhythm, what this structure models. Even when stories get experimental, readers often unconsciously expect or search for these beats, and research shows that stories conforming to this structure tend to be more memorable, emotionally satisfying, and successful with broad audiences. These beats align with how our brains learn, predict, and emotionally engage. Neural studies show the brain parses stories in chunks, like beginning, middle, and end, mirroring 3x structure, which is what I've used for our own chunking in writing a story for easier processing. Each major turning point resets anticipation, encourages emotional investment, and aids memory retrieval. Thanks to activation of the default mode network, or DMN, anterior cingulate, and hippocampus. Every beat is essentially a decision point, or disruption and consequence. That rhythm of setup, disruption, and payoff is what readers are scanning for. When the beats match up with both the protagonist's external and internal arc, something powerful happens. Readers feel the transformation as if it were their own. Studies of narrative immersion show that readers simulate the protagonist's struggle and growth inside their own brain networks, especially the DMN. That's why a doom moment or a moral revelation can hit just as hard as a physical battle. It's important to note that not all conflict is external, and tension is often the real driver of a story. This pattern is cross-cultural too, even in Eastern traditions where conflict might be downplayed in favor of enlightenment or realization. The same underlying brain response is triggered: addiction, disruption, and resolution. And here's the really practical part for you as a writer. Knowing these beats gives you the scaffolding of a story that actually goes somewhere. You can still make it uniquely yours. You can still improvise, still explore. This beat template doesn't make you formulaic. It's only helping you make this already universal structure a more conscious part of your process so you can use it better with extra intentionality and finish your novel more efficiently. And with these major turning points in place, you're less likely to get lost in where your story is going, and your readers won't feel lost either. If you want to apply this transformation-first approach to your own story, the easiest way is with my spellbook outline template. It takes you step by step through these same universal beats with definitions, prompts, and resources to guide you. That way, you're not just hearing about the turning points, you're actually mapping them into your story right now. You'll find the link below to grab your copy and start outlining your novel with the exact structure readers' brains are wired to expect. Pause here to get it downloaded, and then let's look at how you actually use this approach and these turning points to best shape your novel from all these insights. The most powerful way to use an overview outline is to start from the end. In this previous video on preparing to outline, I talked about your novel's ley line, that core meaning or theme. This ley line becomes the truth your protagonist needs to embody by the end of the book. And from the brain science insights, you know your plot should be built to deliver that transformation, not the other way around. Character transformation and their moral decision making activate your reader's DMN, medial prefrontal cortex, and anterior cingulate cortex, the very regions associated with empathy, social cognition, and self reflection. When a character faces internal and external turning points together, as in the spellbook outline template, it gives it emotional resonance and cognitive engagement for your readers, facilitating transportation, meaning deep immersion, which all helps with connection, empathy, and memory, which combine for that powerful impact you want to have on your readers. That's why I often help authors work backward. When you know your character's final transformation, you can map the essential beats that force them into that change. The external plot, your setting, conflicts, antagonists, all exist to push your protagonist along that emotional arc. Let's go back to the example I shared in that other video as our initial planning for this exercise. Suppose the ley line, the message we want to share is, it's better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all. When we adapt this to our protagonist specifically, it becomes her truth. Rose needs to learn that it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. And her corrupted truth from that. Rose believes it's better to love no one, so she never has to lose them. Looks like we've got the beginnings of a romantasy here. No, it won't feel tired or cliched in your actual story, no matter how common it seems laid out like this. It also doesn't make it invalid to write again anyway. It's a common one for a reason, and it reflects real fears of the human condition. Plus, no two stories are going to explore it in the exact same way, and maybe that's the exact way some reader needed in that moment, and then wouldn't it be worth it anyway? And carried through your main turning point beats, this ley line triggers pro-social, empathetic responses that bind readers to your characters. That's why creating a protagonist without one often feels empty or unrealistic. We all carry them. Okay, so here's why this matters for your outline or beat sheet. When you know this destination, the truth your character must learn, it keeps your story from becoming just a random sequence of cool events. You're crafting a purposeful path of challenges that confront their corrupted truth, shake their confidence, and force them to change. This is what creates emotional resonance. Even if readers disagree with the character, they understand her. They see why she believes what she does, and that makes them care about whether she'll change. That's the power of working backward from your ending transformation. It gives you somewhere to go with your outline that makes a huge difference in reader connection. Once you've nailed the transformation, you can sketch the essential beats that will move your character there. You don't need every scene yet, just the turning points that create the rhythm readers are wired to expect. Let me show you what this looks like with Rose. So we know Rose's transformation already on a basic level. And even though readers know she's going to face this lesson, especially in romance where genre expectations are clear, what keeps them hooked is seeing how she justifies her corrupted truth, how convincing it feels in her world, and what forces finally break it. It's an escape into those emotions and experiences all the same. We also know Rose will start out firmly rooted in her corrupted truth. The question now is, what would it take for Rose to make that transformation? How does she get there? Well, we'll have to put her on a course that brings all those deepest fears embedded in her corrupted truth to a head. We need to make her face them and defeat them. And that will allow her to succeed in the climax, which will be sort of like the external manifestation of her internal victory. Yes, this will be a positive arc. It's a romantasy in this example, after all. So, working backward from the transformation, we need a disaster moment that can make her fears come true. Unfortunately for our poor Rose, that means she's going to have to lose, or at least think she's losing, someone she loves. Now, if we didn't before, we know a few more things about our story. Rose needs to fall in love despite not wanting to. And her love interest, at the very least, needs to end up in a near death situation. So it's time to get creative with it. And for that, I'm going to head back to the beginning with Rose's corrupted truth. We need to meet her on that point and find her tension there, which sits somewhere between her fear, truth, and current misguided goal. However, don't mistake your character's corrupted truth for a lack of intelligence. It's survival, even incredibly smart and crafty survival. Characters cling to their corrupted truths because at some point they worked. They made the character strong, safe, or competent in ways that still feel necessary, even though they don't need it anymore and it's no longer truly helping them. But when you dig down to understand why they would be so convinced they're right, that gives you the foundation to build those subtle character quirks from. The things they do to protect themselves, keep their edge, or avoid their fear. That keeps it from feeling tired and annoying for readers. Even if you do write the character's corrupted truth as the obviously wrong way to go at the beginning, it sets the expectation that something will be prompting a change. And that gets readers curious to find out what it will be, even in romance where readers do know what that's likely to be. They expect that, in fact. It's why they read in the genre. They want that predictability in certain things, but they also like the surprising twists of how those predictable things will be handled. Non-romance doesn't have quite the same level of expectations because it's not always a theme about love or a will they, won't they track. So there is more variability. But if there isn't anything the character needs to change, then what's to be gained from the story? Readers subconsciously seek to learn from the experience through witnessing the characters struggle and overcome hardships. But even so, we wouldn't be writing Rose in our hypothetical romantasy in such a way to narrate upfront all the exposition about this. Rather, she'll be thinking she's about to do something big or brave for her this time. Something that we know aligns with her corrupted truth and helps her to adhere to it. A big turning point in her life as she sees it. So, after some brainstorming on Rose's backstory to arrive at that, now we can map that moment as the hook. Hook. Rose has been grieving over her lost love for so long, she decides she's going to join the dangerous dragon riding battalion, long past her prime, where she will be on the front lines. It feels daring and reckless and helps her feel alive again. The training is also grueling and doesn't leave her time to think much on her long-held grief or about forming any new relationships. After all, they've already lost a few in their battalion, so what would be the use? The way she throws herself into mastering her new role makes her rise quickly through the ranks. She's thought of as fearless and shrewd in strategy, and she is. It all seems to be working fine for her, until something happens that rattles her and puts her in an impossible position in a way that challenges all that. And yet she's compelled to choose to get what she thinks she wants despite her fear. We'll map this moment as the inciting incident, something connected to the main external conflict of the story to really get it rolling and force Rose to enter into that conflict by taking action in the first act plot point. So, inciting incident. In this case, maybe war is suddenly on their turf with a surprise attack, and Rose is asked to assume one of the many empty positions of command. It's not something she aspired to. She had been more than fine with her rank and following orders well without further responsibility. But she understands it's more of an order than an offer, and she wants to keep being a dragon rider. She had been liking that life of avoiding her fears. First act plot point. So, despite the risks for her own goals, she accepts, which on one hand makes her responsible for those under her, and it's harder not to feel connected to them. And on the other hand, she needs to work closely with other commanding officers, one in particular that feels too caring for her, too close in understanding her. First act complication. In fact, Rose has to accept this officer's crash course in command if she wants to live through an ambush on her way to her new quarters. When they end up spying on the enemy, Rose needs to put more trust in the commander than she'd normally like in order for them to disrupt the enemy plans. Rising action. As we move into Rose's new world of command, the action rises. the war is more intense. Situations keep popping up in which she needs to work closely with this other commanding officer. And every time she lets herself consider the possibility of a new relationship, it makes her job harder and she doesn't perform as well. So she shuts those thoughts down again because she should have known better. That direction only led to pain in the end. But later, perhaps it's acknowledging or remembering what she gained from that past relationship that allows her to have what she does need in a moment of peril. Enough compassion, maybe even for the enemy, that ends up saving her life down the road in return. And allowing herself to go in the direction of a relationship again brings back the pain, but starts to plant the seed that maybe feeling the pain of heartache is part of living a full, better life. Midpoint complication. By the midpoint, Rose can hardly deny her relationship with the other commander. He tells her he loves her just before he's sent out on a mission. She's too stunned to tell him the news that she's been given the choice of a different assignment due to her particular skills, something more solitary that would suit her just fine. But now Rose has to decide if she will allow love in her life again or if she needs to avoid him for good. She's thoroughly shaken because if she lets love back in, her whole strategy for living a life not consumed by grief collapses, and that terrifies her. Second act plot point. The battalion closes in on impossible stakes. Rose's detachment is now hurting more than helping, yet she can't abandon it. Distracted while considering her choice, Rose fails to protect a dragon rider under her command, one she had formed more of a connection with than she had wanted to let herself believe. The loss seems to confirm her resolve to avoid love and attachment, but not just to avoid her own hurt anymore, to be a more effective commanding dragon rider. So she determines solitude is what she needs to reset her convictions without complications. Rose accepts the new assignment and says goodbye to the commander when he returns from his mission. Second act complication. Little does Rose know the consequence for her actions. The commander has accepted his own new mission, a dangerous one that could decide the fate of the war, one he wouldn't have chanced for Rose's sake otherwise. So Rose is arriving far away at her new outpost when she receives the updates, including new alarming reports about the enemy that will all but doom the commander's mission. Rose abandons the outpost to attempt to intercept, but she fears she'll be too late. Disaster. The worst happens, as we know, but now we can elaborate on it a bit more. Rose is too late to help, and the commanding officer she was trying not to become attached to is dealt a deadly blow and is behind enemy lines. Rose tries to get to him, but ends up captured herself, perhaps only alive due to a bond with her dragon that the enemies want to exploit. Doom moment. Beaten and bound, separated from her dragon, Rose realizes it was all her fault. The guilt over the way she's been living to avoid her grief consumes her. Her inner demon of fear tells her she deserves the worst, and she's tempted to believe it, give up, and feel nothing at all. Transformation. But Rose realizes what she was able to all do despite her lost love of long ago. And that life hadn't been over for her after all. It had still been worth living. So, with nothing left to lose, she admits her love for the commander to herself and determines to use all that gained cunning and training to try to escape and save him despite all the risk and likelihood it will be for nothing. Because even though she knows he will always face life and death situations, it would be better to live with that pain and the risk of loss than to continue without knowing it. Climax. Rose's transformation and acceptance of love as part of her life allows her to perform far more effectively than when fighting it within herself had used to distract and hinder her. She sees that now and uses her new conviction to fuel a daring escape and solo rescue mission. The commander is only mostly dead, kept alive for his dragon, and even when Rose is confronted with the fear of losing him once again, she tells him she loves him, which not only shows him her change and makes good on her internal transformation externally, but signals to him what she's about to do. She relies on the love, the connection they share, which perhaps triggers something in the bonds with the dragons, which will totally be set up prior to this point, of course. By allowing the love, connection, relationship, or whatever in, Rose is able to regain control of her dragon from the enemy, or maybe even the commander's dragon too, and fly them out to relative safety. In the process, Rose has discovered crucial inside information about the enemy, which allows the rest of the battalion to swoop in for a victory. Denouement. In the falling action, the commander is recovering, and Rose is an even better commander herself, learning to live despite the losses she experiences. They and their dragons live happily ever after, biting off the heads of their enemies. Through this resolution, readers see the world reshaped by the hard-won change. Okay, any romantasy writers up for taking on this extended example for real? I'll work on it editorially with you. I'm suddenly invested, even as surface level and rough as it is here. But more seriously, notice how each of these turning points doesn't just move the plot forward. It actively tests, challenges, and reshapes Rose's internal journey. That high-level outline ensures every external event builds toward the emotional payoff readers are wired to expect. I know it might sound a little cheesy yet, and you may worry that such a structured outline will kill your discovery or trap you in a formula. But in practice, the opposite happens. I hope that was clear even as I was putting together this example. That's why I chose not to use a published book here, so you can better see how this might look in early stages to spur your creativity before the polish and finish, even before you have everything figured out, because it will help you understand the main pieces you do still need. Like for this one, now we'd need to create a magic system with dragon bonds or something similar in order to both highlight Rose's issues with connection and her need for love, and to provide solutions in the plot that can rely on Rose's transformation to work. Of course, we also need to do significant world building on the enemy and perhaps politics and even the terrain and what makes a world with dragons possible. Plus, the other characters and Rose's relationships with them, all tailored to support, contrast, or highlight Rose's arc, but also to torture Rose specifically in an extra special way with how this world and characters may be especially hard for her and naturally cause her tension. There's so much more here yet to get creative with and iterate on. Having the structure to work with on both arcs, the points that must happen in some way, were naturally occurring to me just by going through this. By strategically planning these universal turning points, you also free your creative brain to focus on bringing your story to life in the prose instead of constantly worrying about what happens next during drafting. This foundation lets you write forward badly if needed without losing momentum because you know the deeper structure is sound. It keeps you from stalling out, overthinking, or spending years rewriting only to realize your story still doesn't work. Your action step right now is to open your spellbook outline template and sketch your high-level beats. Or if you've already got an outline, double check that each major expected turning point is represented and both internal and external arcs are moving together. Strengthen any weak spots before you move forward. And if you don't have the spellbook outline yet, you'll find the link in the description below to grab it and get started. This type of overview outline is one of the most powerful tools you can use to make sure your novel has solid foundations from the very start. It's perhaps the second most powerful tool for a marketable book, but the real secret sauce to making those awesome turning points actually come alive and do the heavy lifting for your story is in how they're built up through everything that happens in between these beats. Your scene-by-scene choices and how they work together for a bigger, cumulative impact on the reader. This next level of outline has consistently been the single most powerful thing the authors I've worked with have done for their novels.